Put the gun down. Isaiah, she whispered, her voice trembling but her chin held agonizingly high. Tell me where you got him, Isaiah demanded, the cold steel of his revolver lowering just a fraction. His gaze wasn't on her, but on the toddler clinging to her apron. The boy stared back with one storm-gray eye and one pierced with golden amber. A genetic impossibility. A ghost reborn. He's mine, Isla choked out, shielding the boy. He has my dead brother's eyes. Isaiah's voice broke, the ruthless boss shattering in the dim light of the kitchen. Who are you? And why are you raising the heir to my empire serving cheap pasta? The heavy scent of simmering garlic, burnt butter, and cheap Chianti was permanently woven into the fabric of Isla's uniform. It was a smell she could never quite wash out, no matter how fiercely she scrubbed the coarse black cotton in her tiny apartment's rusting sink. Tonight, the air in the back kitchen of Il Nido was thicker than usual, heavy with the oppressive humidity of a late August heatwave and the frantic, chaotic energy of a fully booked Thursday night. Thursday nights were not meant for families or casual diners looking for a quiet plate of linguine. Thursday nights belonged to the shadows that ran the city. Isla stood by the stainless steel prep station, her hands moving with mechanical precision as she wiped down a stack of gleaming dessert plates. Her fingers were raw, the skin peeling around the cuticles from hours submerged in industrial-strength dish soap. But she didn't allow herself the luxury of stopping. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant drowning in the overwhelming tide of her reality. She was 24 years old, a single mother living in a neighborhood where sirens were the only lullabies her son ever heard, working a grueling shift that barely kept the eviction notices at bay. She brushed a stray lock of exhausted, dark hair from her damp forehead, her hazel eyes scanning the double swinging doors that separated the kitchen's sweaty chaos from the dimly lit, velvet-lined dining room. Out there, the city's criminal elite dined on veal marsala and negotiated territories between sips of wine that cost more than her monthly rent. She had learned early on to make herself invisible, to be a ghost carrying a tray. You didn't look them in the eye, you didn't listen to their hushed conversations, and you certainly never asked questions. Table 4 needs a refill. Isla. The head waiter snapped, pushing past her with a tray of steaming osso buco. He didn't look at her. He was sweating profusely, his face pale with the specific terror that only the Thursday night clientele could instill. Isla nodded silently. Grabbing a fresh pitcher of iced water, she pushed through the swinging doors. The transition from the bright, fluorescent glare of the kitchen to the moody, amber glow of the dining room, momentarily blinding her. The atmosphere out here was suffocating, thick with expensive cologne, cigar smoke, and the unspoken threat of violence. She moved gracefully, navigating the narrow aisles between the mahogany tables, like a dancer, avoiding landmines. She poured the water for table 4, her gaze fixed firmly on the white linen tablecloth. She could hear the low, gravelly voice of a man complaining about a delayed shipment at the docks, but she tuned the words out, letting them wash over her like meaningless static. Her mind was a million miles away, locked in a tiny, cramped bedroom 3 miles from here, where her son was hopefully sleeping under the watchful, albeit highly unreliable, eye of her elderly neighbor. Everything she did, every degrading tip she accepted, every burn she suffered from a hot plate, was for him. He was the secret she guarded with her life, the beautiful, heart-breaking anchor that kept her from drifting away completely. As she retreated toward the kitchen, a sudden, chilling silence rippled through the front of the restaurant. It was not a gradual quieting, but a sharp, violent cessation of sound, as if the air had been sucked from the room. Isla froze, the heavy glass pitcher suddenly feeling slippery in her grasp. She didn't need to turn around to know what had happened. She knew the rhythm of this place. She knew the weight of that silence. The front door had opened, and he had walked in. Isla risked a sideways glance, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. There, standing in the entryway, shedding a tailored wool overcoat into the hands of a trembling hostess, was Isaiah. He was a man who commanded the room, not with boisterous volume, but with a terrifying, absolute stillness. Tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a dark, bespoke suit that seemed to absorb the dim light around him. His face was a study in cold angles, a sharp jawline, and eyes as dark and unforgiving as a starless night. He moved with a predatory grace, a silent apex predator, walking amongst livestock. He was the undisputed head of the family, the man who had ruthlessly clawed his way to the top after the violent, sudden death of his younger brother a year ago. Isla quickly looked away, her breath hitching in her throat. She gripped the pitcher tighter, her knuckles turning white, and hurried back toward the safety of the kitchen doors. She had never spoken to him, had never even served his table. The manager always reserved that terrifying honor for himself. But just being in the same room as Isaiah sent a primal, chilling warning through her blood. He was a force of destruction, a man who dealt in blood and leverage. She pushed through the swinging doors, leaning back against them for a second, squeezing her eyes shut as she fought to steady her racing heart. She told herself she was just a waitress, just a shadow. He didn't know she existed. And she prayed to whatever gods were listening that he never, ever would. She had secrets to keep, and a man like Isaiah made a business out of tearing secrets from the dark. The dining room remained wrapped in a tense, hushed reverence, as Isaiah and his inner circle claimed their usual booth in the back corner, a crescent of deep red leather positioned perfectly, so no man had his back to the door. Isla watched from the service station, obscured by the massive espresso machine, as the manager practically tripped over himself to pour the first glass of a vintage Barolo. Isaiah didn't smile. He didn't thank the manager. He merely stared straight ahead, his dark eyes sweeping the room with a cold, analytical detachment. Even from this distance, Isla could see the heavy, invisible burden resting on his broad shoulders. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a year, a king wearing a crown woven from razor wire. There was a dangerous, coiled energy about him, a silent rage that seemed to hum just beneath the surface of his immaculate suit. Isla, wake up. A harsh whisper snapped her out of her observation. It was Maria, another waitress, her face flushed and eyes wide with panic. The boss wants you to take over Section 3. Antonio just dropped a tray of glasses and sliced his hand open. He's bleeding everywhere in the alley. Isla's stomach dropped. Section 3. The tables immediately adjacent to the red leather booth. Maria? No. You know the manager doesn't let us near. I have table 7. They're complaining about the soup, and the kitchen is backed up. Maria interrupted, shoving a silver tray laden with a bottle of sparkling water and 2 crystal glasses into Isla's chest. Just drop this off at table 12 and get out of there. Don't look at them. Don't speak. Just go. Isla swallowed hard, the dry lump in her throat feeling the size of a golf ball. She took the tray, its weight grounding her slightly. Okay, she whispered, more to herself than to Maria. Okay, just a shadow. She smoothed the front of her apron, took a deep, steadying breath that did nothing to calm her racing pulse, and stepped back out into the dining room. The air felt heavier the closer she got to the back corner. The low hum of conversation from Isaiah's booth was indistinguishable, a deep, rhythmic bass that vibrated in Isla's chest. She kept her eyes glued to the parquet floor, measuring each step, Table 12 was occupied by two low-level associates who were arguing in hushed, aggressive tones. Isla approached quietly, standing at the edge of the table. "Excuse me," she murmured softly, her voice barely a breath. She reached across to place the water glasses on the table. At that exact moment, the associate on the left threw his hands up in a dramatic, angry gesture. His heavy, gold-ringed fist slammed hard into the underside of Isla's tray. The world seemed to downshift into agonizing slow motion. Isla watched, paralyzed, as the heavy bottle of sparkling water tipped. She scrambled to catch it, her fingers desperately grasping at the slick green glass. But she was a fraction of a second too late. The bottle hit the edge of the table, shattering with a sharp, violent crack that sounded like a gunshot in the tense quiet of the restaurant. Icy water and jagged shards of glass exploded outward in a glittering, destructive arc. Isla gasped, stumbling backward as the cold water soaked through her thin black shirt, the sharp sting of a small cut opening on her forearm registering a moment later. But it wasn't her own pain that froze the blood in her veins. The arc of water had not stopped at table 12. The momentum had carried the spray directly into the adjacent booth. Silence, absolute and terrifying, slammed down on the restaurant. Isla stood frozen, water dripping from her hair into her eyes, her chest heaving as she slowly, agonizingly, turned her head toward the red leather booth. Isaiah was sitting perfectly still, drops of water beaded on the lapel of his charcoal suit, glistening in the amber light. A single jagged shard of green glass rested on the pristine white linen tablecloth directly in front of him, mere inches from his resting hand. The men around him reacted instantly. Chairs scraped violently against the floor. Two massive bodyguards were suddenly on their feet, hands dropping to the ominous bulges beneath their jackets, their eyes locked onto Isla with lethal intent. The associate who had caused the spill shrank back in his chair, his face draining of all color, whimpering something unintelligible. Isla couldn't breathe. The air in her lungs had turned to lead. She was staring directly into the abyss. Isaiah slowly raised a hand, two fingers extended, a silent command. The bodyguards froze, though their hands didn't leave their weapons. Slowly, agonizingly, Isaiah turned his head and looked at her. Isla expected to see rage. She expected to see the monstrous violence the rumors spoke of, but as his dark, bottomless eyes met hers, she didn't see fire. She saw a terrifying, profound coldness. He looked at her not as a person, but as a minor, unfortunate calculation. I am so sorry." Isla forced the words out, her voice trembling violently, tearing her gaze away from his and staring at the shattered glass on the floor. "It was an accident. I will clean it up immediately. Please." She dropped to her knees, heedless of the sharp shards scattered across the wood, and began blindly gathering the broken glass with her bare hands. Her hands shook so badly she immediately sliced her thumb, a bright bead of crimson welling up and mixing with the spilled water. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. "Leave it." The voice was a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. It wasn't loud, but it carried absolute authority. Isla froze, her bloodied hands hovering over the mess. She slowly looked up from the floor, her hazel eyes wide with pure, unadulterated terror. Isaiah was looking down at her, his gaze dropping briefly to the blood welling on her fingers, then back up to her pale, terrified face. For a fraction of a second, the impenetrable mask of the Mafia boss slipped, and a flicker of something unreadable curiosity, recognition, pity, passed through his dark eyes before being instantly locked away. "Get up," Isaiah commanded quietly. "Go to the back and bandage your hand. Send the manager to clean this." Isla didn't need to be told twice. She scrambled to her feet, clutching her bleeding hand to her chest. Her head bowed in submission. She practically ran back to the kitchen, the swinging doors closing behind her, finally shutting out the heavy, suffocating weight of his stare. But as she leaned against the cool tile of the kitchen wall, gasping for air, she knew the truth. She was no longer a ghost. He had seen her. The heavy, metallic clank of the deadbolt sliding into place sounded like a death knell in the cramped, humid hallway of Isla's apartment building. She leaned her forehead against the peeling paint of the door, fighting back a wave of nauseating panic. It was 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. Her shift at Il Nido started in exactly 1 hour, and Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman down the hall who usually watched her son, had just been taken away in an ambulance after a severe fall. Isla turned around, sliding her back down the door until she hit the scuffed linoleum floor. Across the tiny room, sitting on a worn second-hand rug, was her son. He was quietly stacking colorful plastic blocks, utterly oblivious to the catastrophe spiraling around him. "Mama?" he murmured softly, his tiny hands pausing over a yellow block as he looked up at her. Isla's breath hitched, the sharp, familiar ache piercing her chest as it always did when he looked at her. He had her dark hair, but his face, the slope of his nose, the stubborn set of his jaw was a miniature, heartbreaking replica of a man who was buried in a closed casket a year ago. But it was his eyes that were the true betrayal, the absolute proof of a bloodline she was desperate to hide. One eye was a stormy, slate gray. The other was a piercing, unnatural golden amber. A genetics anomaly, a beautiful, dangerous secret. "It's okay, baby," Isla whispered, forcing a fragile smile onto her face as she pushed herself up from the floor. "Mama just has to think for a minute." She pulled her cracked cell phone from her pocket and stared at the screen. She had no one else. She was estranged from her own family, having fled them to protect her son. She couldn't call off work. If she missed a Thursday shift, the manager would fire her on the spot. And without this week's tips, they would be sleeping on the street by the end of the month. There was only one impossible, terrifying option. 45 minutes later, Isla slipped through the heavy steel service door at the back of the restaurant, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Slung across her chest, hidden beneath an oversized, ratty gray cardigan she had thrown over her uniform, was a baby carrier. The child was pressed warmly against her, mercifully asleep, his face tucked into her neck. She moved quickly through the labyrinthine back corridors of the restaurant, avoiding the main kitchen prep area. She navigated toward the rear storage room, a windowless, soundproofed cage used for securing high-end liquor and dry goods. The manager rarely came back here during service, relying on the inventory logs. Isla unlocked the heavy door with a stolen spare key, slipping inside and gently closing it behind her. The room smelled of dust, cardboard, and aged whiskey. She quickly cleared a space on a sturdy lower shelf, laying down a thick blanket she had brought from home. With agonizing care, she unclipped the carrier, lowering her sleeping son onto the makeshift bed. She surrounded him with his favorite stuffed bear and a small battery-operated fan to keep the stagnant air moving. "I'm so sorry, my brave boy," she whispered, her voice cracking as she brushed a soft kiss against his forehead. "You have to be a little mouse today, so quiet. I'll check on you every chance I get. I promise." He stirred slightly, a tiny sigh escaping his lips, but his mismatched eyes remained closed. Isla backed away, the heavy knot of guilt and terror tightening in her stomach. She locked the storage room door behind her, sliding the key into her apron pocket. She had just broken the most fundamental rule of her survival. She had brought her greatest vulnerability into the lion's den. The shift began like a slow-moving nightmare. Every clattering pan, Every shouted order in the kitchen sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system. She was hyper-aware of the distance between the dining room floor and the back hallway. She worked with a manic, desperate energy, taking on extra tables, running food faster than anyone else, doing everything in her power to ensure the manager didn't send her to the back for supplies. At 8 p.m., the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. The front doors opened, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Isaiah had arrived. Tonight, his entourage was larger, the tension radiating from them thicker, more volatile. They took their corner booth, the air heavy with unspoken threats and urgent business. Isla watched from the shadows, her blood running cold as she noticed Isaiah's demeanor. He wasn't sitting with his usual cold detachment. He was leaning forward, his jaw clenched tight, his dark eyes snapping with a dangerous, explosive anger as he spoke in low, sharp tones to his underboss. "Table 4. Isla, go," the manager hissed, shoving her toward the floor. Isla moved automatically. Her mind split in two. Half of her was navigating the dangerous currents of the dining room, pouring wine, clearing plates, avoiding the sharp gazes of violent men. The other half was desperately anchored to the locked storage room down the dark back hallway, praying for silence. By 10 p.m., the pressure was unbearable. The meeting in Isaiah's booth had escalated from quiet intensity to a hostile, simmering rage. The other patrons had quickly and quietly paid their tabs and fled, leaving the restaurant almost entirely to the Mafia crew. Isla was standing by the espresso machine, her hands shaking as she pulled a shot of espresso. When she heard it, it was faint, muffled by the heavy doors and the distance, but to a mother's ear, it was louder than a siren. A high, thin wail echoing from the back hallway. Her son had woken up, and he was crying. Isla dropped the porcelain cup. It shattered on the metal grate, brown liquid splashing everywhere. But she didn't care. Panic, absolute and blinding, consumed her. She spun around, ready to sprint toward the back hallway, to silence him before anyone else heard. But as she turned, her heart stopped dead in her chest. Isaiah had abruptly stood up from the leather booth, slamming his hand down on the table with a force that rattled the crystal. The men around him fell, dead, silent. He wasn't looking at his underboss anymore. He was looking toward the kitchen doors. He was looking toward the hallway. He had heard it too. The silence in the dining room was absolute. A heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on Isla's chest until she couldn't draw breath. Isaiah stood rigid by the booth, a monument of dark, coiled violence, his head tilted slightly, listening. No, 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 Isla's mind screamed. A frantic, desperate mantra. She abandoned the shattered espresso cup, her legs moving before her brain could form a coherent plan. She had to get to the back. She had to get to the storage room before he did. She pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The kitchen staff had frozen, sensing the sudden shift in the air, the dangerous quiet bleeding in from the front. Isla ignored them, breaking into a desperate sprint toward the dim, narrow corridor that led to the dry storage. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" the manager barked, stepping into her path, his face flushed with anger. "Get back out there! Move!" Isla shrieked, a feral, uncharacteristic sound tearing from her throat as she shoved the grown man hard into a stainless steel counter. He stumbled back in shock, but Isla didn't look back. She rounded the corner into the back hallway, her hand diving frantically into her apron pocket for the stolen key. But as she cleared the corner, she slammed to a halt, the blood draining from her face, leaving her cold and numb. The heavy steel door of the storage room was already open. Standing in the doorway, his massive frame blocking the dim light from within, was Isaiah. Isla couldn't move. She couldn't speak. She was paralyzed by a terror so profound it felt like dying. Isaiah stood frozen in the threshold, his broad back to her. The crying had stopped, replaced by a soft, confused babbling. Slowly, moving with a terrifying, deliberate caution, Isaiah stepped fully into the small, dusty room. Isla's legs gave out. She collapsed against the cinder-block wall of the hallway, her knees hitting the hard floor with a dull thud. She dragged herself forward, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps, until she reached the open doorway. She gripped the metal doorframe, pulling herself up just enough to look inside. The scene unfolding before her was surreal, a violent clash of two completely incompatible worlds. The ruthless, untouchable boss of the city's most feared crime family was down on one knee on the dirty concrete floor, surrounded by boxes of canned tomatoes and cheap vodka. He was staring down at the makeshift bed of blankets. Her son was sitting up, clutching his stuffed bear, completely unafraid. He was looking up at the giant man in the expensive suit with innocent, wide-eyed curiosity. Isaiah's hands that had ordered executions and broken empires, were trembling visibly. He reached out, his movements achingly slow, as if he were approaching a mirage that would vanish if he breathed too hard. His large, scarred fingers gently brushed against the soft curve of the toddler's cheek. The boy giggled, leaning into the touch. Isla watched, tears streaming silently down her face. As Isaiah leaned closer, the dim overhead bulb casting harsh shadows across his sharp features. He stared into the child's face, searching, calculating, breaking. Then the boy blinked, looking up at the light, and opened his eyes fully to the man above him. Isla saw the exact moment the world shattered for Isaiah. The Mafia boss violently jerked back, a ragged, choked gasp tearing from his throat. He fell back onto his hands, scrambling away from the blanket, his dark eyes wide, with a look of absolute, unadulterated shock. He stared at the boy, stared at the impossible, undeniable truth looking back at him. One eye, the color of a raging storm. The other, the color of burning amber. The eyes of the brother he had buried a year ago. Isaiah's chest heaved, his breathing ragged and harsh. He slowly pulled himself up to his full, towering height, the shock bleeding from his face, replaced rapidly by a dark, terrifying intensity. He turned around, his gaze snapping to the doorway. He saw Isla kneeling there, trembling, tears carving tracks through the dust on her face. The transition was instantaneous. The vulnerable man on the floor vanished, and the monster returned, harder and colder than before. In one fluid, terrifying motion, he crossed the small room. He reached into his coat, drawing a heavy, black revolver. The metallic click of the hammer pulling back, echoing like a bomb in the confined space. "Put the gun down, Isaiah," she whispered, her voice trembling but her chin held agonizingly high. She didn't know where the courage came from. Perhaps it was just the final, desperate instinct of a cornered animal. "Tell me where you got him," Isaiah demanded, the cold steel of his revolver lowering just a fraction, pointing squarely at her chest. His gaze wasn't on her, but on the toddler who had now crawled over to cling to Isla's apron. The boy stared back at the man with the gun, one storm-gray eye and one pierced with golden amber. A genetic impossibility. A ghost reborn. "He's mine," Isla choked out, violently pulling the boy behind her, shielding his small body with her own. "He has my dead brother's eyes," Isaiah's voice broke, the ruthless boss shattering again in the dim light of the storage room. The gun lowered further, his arm shaking. "Who are you? And why are you raising the heir to my empire serving cheap pasta?" The silence that followed his demand was heavier than the humid air of the storage room. It pressed down on Isla, threatening to crush her into the concrete floor. She kept her arms wrapped fiercely around her son, burying his face into her shoulder to shield him from the sight of the dark steel weapon. "I asked you a question," Isaiah said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. He took a step forward, towering over her kneeling form. The gun was no longer pointed at her, hanging loosely at his side, but his presence was a weapon all its own. "My brother is dead. I buried him. So explain to me how a ghost is sitting in a supply closet." Isla swallowed the copper taste of fear in her mouth. She looked up into his eyes, seeing the desperate, violent grief swirling beneath the cold exterior. She had run from this family, hidden in the darkest, poorest corners of the city to escape their reach. And now, by some cruel twist of fate, the devil himself had found her. His name is yours to figure out, I guess," Isla stammered, her voice shaking. "But my son, he is mine. I loved him. Your brother." Isaiah flinched, a microscopic tightening of his jaw. He never mentioned a woman. He never mentioned a child, because he was trying to protect us from you. Isla spat, the anger suddenly burning through the terror. The adrenaline of a mother protecting her young flared hot in her veins. He knew what your world was. He knew what you were becoming. He wanted out, Isaiah. He wanted a quiet life. With me. Isaiah stared at her, the words striking him like physical blows. He stepped back, running his free hand roughly over his face, a gesture of profound exhaustion. He was reckless. He was foolish. He got himself killed trying to play outside the rules. He got killed because of the enemies you made. Isla fired back, tears of grief and rage spilling over her lashes. He hid me away when I got pregnant, told me if anything ever happened to him, I was to disappear, that if your enemies didn't find us, you would, and that you would take my baby and turn him into a monster just like you. The silence returned, brittle and sharp. Isaiah looked down at the boy, who was now peeking bravely over his mother's shoulder, his mismatched eyes locked onto the tall, dark stranger. Isaiah felt a phantom pain rip through his chest. The boy was the spitting image of his brother at that age. The exact same stubborn jaw, the same unruly dark hair, and those impossible haunting eyes. His brother's blood, his family's blood, living in squalor, hidden in a pantry, wearing hand-me-down clothes. "You think I'm a monster," Isaiah said quietly, the anger draining from his voice, leaving only a hollow, terrifying certainty. "I know what you are," Isla whispered, pulling her son tighter. "Then you know what I have to do," Isaiah replied. He smoothly slipped the revolver back into the holster beneath his jacket. He didn't look like a man who had just found a miracle. He looked like a king who had just discovered a terrible new war he had to fight. "Please," Isla begged, her voice breaking into a sob. "Please, just let us go. You don't know us. I'll take him away. You'll never see us again. I swear it. Just pretend you never opened this door." Isaiah looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw the exhaustion carved into the lines of her face, the raw, blistered skin of her hands from scrubbing dishes, the cheap, threadbare clothing. She had endured absolute misery to protect his brother's child. She had fought a quiet, desperate war of survival every single day. "My brother is dead," Isaiah said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "My father is dead. This boy is the only innocent blood left in my family." He stepped forward, reaching down. Isla cringed away, a scream building in her throat. But Isaiah didn't reach for the child. He grabbed Isla by the upper arm, his grip firm but not painful, and hauled her to her feet. "You are not a ghost anymore, Isla," Isaiah stated, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a possessive, unbreakable intensity. And he is not a secret. Not anymore. "What are you doing?" She panicked, struggling against his grip, but it was like fighting a stone wall. "I am taking what belongs to my family," Isaiah said coldly. He turned toward the open doorway, practically dragging her alongside him, the heavy door slamming shut behind them. "You're coming with me, both of you. Tonight." The journey from the suffocating back hallways of Il Nido to the armored black SUV waiting in the alley was a blur of frantic motion and terrifying compliance. Isla clutched her son so tightly to her chest that he began to fuss. But she couldn't loosen her grip. She was surrounded by men Isaiah's massive, silent bodyguards, who had materialized the moment their boss stepped out of the storage room. Isaiah walked ahead of her, his stride long and purposeful, clearing a path through the kitchen. The kitchen staff stopped dead, their eyes wide with shock as they watched the untouchable mob boss escorting the quiet, exhausted dishwasher out the back door. The manager stood frozen by the ovens, completely speechless. "Get in," Isaiah commanded, opening the heavy rear door of the SUV. The interior smelled of expensive leather and steel. Isla hesitated, her feet rooted to the damp asphalt of the alley. "Where are you taking us?" she demanded, her voice shaking violently. "I have a life. I have an apartment. I can't just leave." Isaiah stopped, turning back to face her. The alley was dark, illuminated only by the harsh, yellow glare of a single streetlight. "You have a roach-infested box 3 miles from here. You have a job that breaks your hands, that life is over. Get in the car, Isla, before I lose the last shred of my patience and just take the boy." The threat was spoken calmly, logically, making it infinitely more terrifying. Isla knew he could do it. He could tear her son from her arms right here in the alley, and no one would stop him. Defeated, tears burning her eyes, she climbed into the cavernous back seat, pulling the door shut behind her. Isaiah slid into the seat beside her, the air in the cabin instantly becoming dense and charged. He tapped the glass partition separating them from the driver, and the massive vehicle lurched forward, pulling smoothly out into the neon-lit city streets. The ride was agonizingly silent. Isla stared out the tinted window, watching the familiar, gritty streets of her neighborhood blur past, replaced slowly by the towering, pristine high-rises of the city's wealthiest district. She was trapped in a moving vault with a man who dealt in death. She looked down at her son. The boy had fallen back asleep, lulled by the smooth hum of the powerful engine, his small head resting over her heart. She wrapped her ratty cardigan tighter around him, a pathetic shield against the dark world they were speeding toward. "He's quiet," Isaiah observed. His voice was softer now, the harsh edge slightly blunted by the darkness of the car. Isla didn't look at him. "He's used to having to be quiet." She felt, rather than saw, Isaiah flinch at the condemnation in her tone. "I didn't know," Isaiah said, the admission sounding forced, as if the words themselves tasted bitter. "If I had known my brother left a child, I would never have let you live like that. We lived like that to hide from you," Isla reminded him coldly, finally turning her head to meet his gaze. The streetlights flickered across his face, highlighting the deep, dark circles under his eyes, the heavy lines of stress around his mouth. "Your brother knew that your money, your protection, it all comes with a price in blood. I won't let my son pay that." Isaiah held her gaze, his expression unreadable. "My world is dangerous, yes, but it is also secure. Here, with me, he will never go hungry. He will never wear rags. He will be protected by an army. Out there, on your own. You were one missed paycheck away from losing him to the state. I would rather raise him in a cardboard box than in a mansion built on graves," Isla whispered fiercely, a heavy, Suffocating silence descended on the car once more. Isaiah turned his head, looking out his own window. For a long time, the only sound was the hum of the tires on the asphalt. "You think you have a choice in this?" Isaiah finally spoke, his voice dropping back into that terrifying absolute authority. He didn't look back at her. "You don't. You are the mother of my blood. That makes you family, and no one walks away from this family. You will live in my home. You will accept my protection. You will let me give this boy the life my brother couldn't." He slowly turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers, pinning her to the leather seat. "Fight me on this, Isla, and you will find out exactly why my brother was so afraid." Isaiah's home was less a mansion and more a modern fortress disguised as architectural brilliance. Perched on a cliffside overlooking the crashing black waves of the ocean, the estate was a sprawling compound of glass, steel, and unyielding stone, surrounded by high walls, and silently patrolled by men who moved like shadows. For the first 3 days, Isla felt like a ghost haunting a museum. She was given a suite of rooms larger than her entire apartment building, filled with sunlight, plush carpets, and a massive, cloud-like bed. A silent, terrifyingly efficient staff had populated closets with expensive, understated clothing for her, and an entire nursery had seemingly materialized overnight for her son. Yet, she remained locked in a state of high-alert terror. She refused the clothes, wearing her washed-out jeans and oversized sweaters. She refused to let her son sleep in the opulent nursery, keeping his crib pulled directly against her own bed. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, waiting for the executioner's block. Isaiah, however, proved elusive. He was a phantom in his own home, leaving before dawn and returning long after she had barricaded herself in her rooms. The only proof of his existence was the constant, suffocating security presence, and the way the entire estate seemed to hold its breath when his armored car pulled into the driveway. On the 4th night, the illusion of safety shattered. It was past midnight. Isla was sitting by the massive floor-to-ceiling window of her bedroom, holding her sleeping son, watching the rain lash against the reinforced glass. The storm outside was violent, reflecting the turmoil in her own chest. Suddenly, the house went dark. The low hum of the central air conditioning died. The subtle, glowing security panels lining the hallways snapped off. The only light left was the frantic blue flashes of lightning illuminating the furious ocean below. Isla's blood ran cold. She stood up instantly, clutching her son tighter. This wasn't a power outage. A fortress like this had redundant generators. This was intentional. Before she could process her next move, a heavy, deafening boom echoed from the front of the compound, shaking the floor beneath her feet. The sound of shattered glass and the sharp, staccato crack of automatic gunfire followed immediately, cutting through the roar of the storm. Panic, sharp and blinding, consumed her. They were under attack. Her son whimpered, startled awake by the noise, his tiny hands gripping her sweater. "Shh, baby. Shh." Isla breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She spun around, scanning the pitch-black room. The door. She had to lock the door. She ran toward the heavy oak door of her suite, fumbling blindly for the deadbolt. Just as her fingers brushed the cold metal, the door violently burst open. Isla screamed, stumbling backward, shielding her child with her body. A massive, dark figure lunged into the room. A flash of lightning illuminated the space for a fraction of a second, revealing the intruder. It was Isaiah. He wasn't wearing his impeccable suit. He was dressed in dark tactical gear, a heavy assault rifle slung across his chest, a sleek black handgun gripped tightly in his right hand. His face was a mask of absolute, lethal fury, streaked with rain and something dark that looked terrifyingly like blood. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice a harsh, guttural bark that cut through the chaos outside. He didn't wait for an answer. Crossing the room in 2 massive strides and grabbing her by the arm. "What is happening?" Isla sobbed, struggling to keep her footing as he practically dragged her toward the center of the room, away from the glass windows. "The Moreno family," Isaiah growled, his eyes constantly scanning the dark hallway behind him. "They found out about the boy. There's a leak in my organization. They want to end my bloodline tonight to take the docs." He pushed her roughly into the massive walk-in closet, a windowless, reinforced box lined with cedar. "Get in the back. Sit on the floor. Do not make a sound, no matter what you hear. Do you understand me?" "Isaiah, please," Isla cried, the reality of the violence outside finally crashing over her. Isaiah stopped. He looked down at her, at the terrified woman clutching his brother's child in the dark. In the dim, ambient light, the cold, untouchable boss was gone. The man standing before her was desperate, breathing heavily, entirely focused on their survival. He reached out, his bloody hand gently cupping the back of her head for a fleeting second, pulling her forehead against his chest. He smelled of rain, ozone, and the sharp, metallic tang of gunpowder. "I will not let them touch you," Isaiah swore, his voice a low, vibrating vow that resonated deep in her bones. "I lost him. I will not lose you. Hide." He stepped back, pulling the heavy closet doors shut, plunging her into absolute, terrifying darkness. The last thing she saw was the deadly, unforgiving resolve in his eyes as he turned to face the war outside. For an hour, Isla sat in the suffocating darkness of the cedar closet, her body curled tightly around her son, rocking him gently as he cried softly against her chest. Outside her wooden sanctuary, the world tore itself apart. The heavy, muffled thuds of gunfire, the violent crashing of furniture, and the shouting of desperate men bled through the walls, each sound a physical blow to her fraying nerves. She prayed. She prayed to gods she didn't believe in, begging for silence, begging for safety. She imagined the doors being ripped open by men who didn't care that her son was innocent. She imagined Isaiah falling, his dark eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. To her shock, the second thought hurt almost as much as the first. Finally, the gunfire ceased. The house fell into a heavy, ominous silence, broken only by the continuous drone of the storm outside. Isla didn't move. She held her breath, listening to the heavy, uneven footsteps approaching the bedroom. The closet doors slowly clicked open. Isla squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the worst. "It's clear." The voice was rough, ragged, and exhausted. Isla opened her eyes. Isaiah stood in the doorway, framed by the pale gray light of dawn creeping through the shattered bedroom windows. He was a terrifying sight. His tactical vest was scored with bullet grazes, his dark shirt torn, and a deep, bloody gash ran along his left cheekbone, dripping slowly onto his collar. But he was alive. Isla let out a fractured sob, the tension rapidly leaving her body, leaving her weak and trembling. She scrambled up from the floor, clutching her child. "We have to move," Isaiah said, his tone purely logistical, though his chest heaved with every breath. "The compound is compromised. My men are clearing the bodies, but the police will be here in 20 minutes. We go to the safe house." The drive was a frantic, terrifying blur. They were loaded into a different, unmarked vehicle, speeding away from the coast and deep into the dense, forested mountains miles outside the city limits. The safe house was a stark contrast to the glass fortress. A small, unassuming, heavily reinforced cabin hidden entirely by ancient pine trees. Once inside, the heavy steel door locked behind them with a final, echoing thud. They were alone. The driver had remained outside to stand guard. Isaiah walked into the center of the dusty, dimly lit living room and stopped. The adrenaline seemed to suddenly evaporate from his body. leaving nothing but ruin. He swayed slightly, his hand reaching out to grip the back of a worn leather chair to steady himself. Isla watched him, still clutching her son. The terrifying Mafia boss had been replaced by a battered, bleeding man who looked like he was barely holding himself together. "You're hurt," Isla whispered, her voice loud in the quiet cabin. Isaiah grunted, pressing a hand to his side, his face twisting in pain. "It's nothing. Just a graze." He tried to take a step toward the small hallway, but his leg gave out. He collapsed heavily into the leather chair, his head falling back, a harsh hiss of pain escaping his clenched teeth. Isla didn't think. She reacted. She set her son down on the rug. The boy immediately began playing with the fringe, exhausted but unharmed, and rushed to the kitchen area. She tore through the cabinets, finding a first aid kit, a bottle of cheap whiskey, and a clean towel. She returned to Isaiah, kneeling beside his chair. "Take the vest off," she ordered, her voice surprisingly steady. Isaiah opened one dark eye, looking down at her. "You shouldn't be doing this. You should be resting. You're bleeding on the floor, Isaiah." "Take it off." With a pained grimace, he managed to unbuckle the heavy Kevlar, letting it drop heavily to the floor. Isla unbuttoned his torn shirt, peeling it back to reveal his torso. The bruising was extensive, dark purple and black blooming across his ribs. Along his right flank was a deep, ugly laceration that was sluggishly bleeding. Isla uncapped the whiskey. "This is going to burn," she warned. "I deserve to burn," Isaiah whispered. Staring at the ceiling, she poured the alcohol over the wound. Isaiah's entire body went rigid, his jaw clamping so hard she thought his teeth might shatter, but he didn't make a sound. She quickly began cleaning the blood, applying pressure with the towel. "You saved us," Isla said quietly, focusing on the wound to avoid his gaze. "You didn't have to come back for us. You could have fought them from the front." Isaiah looked down at her, his expression intense and heavy. "There is no us and them anymore, Isla. When I looked in that closet and saw you hiding, when I saw my brother's eyes looking back at me from the dark." He stopped, his voice failing. He reached out, his hand gently catching a stray lock of her dark hair, tucking it behind her ear. His touch was incredibly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence he had just committed. "I realized that if they took you, there would be nothing left of me worth saving." Isla's breath caught. She looked up, meeting his deep, shadowed gaze. The distance between them, the vast, terrifying chasm of their different worlds, suddenly felt incredibly small. She saw the immense weight of his life, the crushing loneliness of his power. For the first time, she didn't see the monster who ruled the shadows. She saw a man who was utterly, completely alone, bleeding on a chair, desperately trying to protect the only family he had left. And in the quiet of the mountain cabin, Isla realized with a terrifying jolt that the walls she had built to hate him were already starting to crumble. The mountains offered a tense, breathless sanctuary. For 5 days, they existed in a suspended reality within the small cabin. Outside, a shadow war raged across the city, as Isaiah's lieutenants brutally dismantled the Moreno faction. Inside, a different kind of quiet revolution was occurring. Isla watched Isaiah with her son. The terrifying, cold-blooded boss would sit on the dusty floor for hours, clumsily stacking wooden blocks, a rare, genuine softness, smoothing the harsh lines of his face when the boy laughed. He was patient. He was protective. He was everything his brother had been, but hardened by the cruel fire of the world. She also watched how Isaiah looked at her. It was no longer the possessive, calculating glare of a mob boss. It was a heavy, lingering gaze, filled with a quiet, desperate respect. He watched her cook with limited supplies. He watched her soothe the child's nightmares. And he looked at her as if she were the only bright, untainted thing in his dark universe. On the evening of the 6th day, the satellite phone on the kitchen counter finally rang. Isaiah answered it. His voice was low, clipped, the deadly authority returning instantly. He listened for a long moment, said, "Burn the rest of their shipments. Make sure the message is absolute," and hung up. He turned around to face Isla, who was standing by the sink, drying a plate, her body rigid with tension. "It's over," Isaiah said, the heavy exhaustion returning to his voice. "The Merinos are finished. The city is secure. It's safe to return." Isla slowly placed the plate on the counter. She gripped the edge of the porcelain sink, staring out the small window into the darkening pines. The terrifying reality was rushing back in. The suspended animation was over. "Return to what?" Isla asked quietly. "To the fortress? To the bodyguards? To waiting for the next family to decide they want to end your bloodline?" Isaiah walked slowly across the small kitchen, stopping a few feet behind her. He didn't reach out to touch her, though the air between them vibrated with the urge to do so. "I can't change what I am, Isla," Isaiah said, his voice heavy with a deep, tragic resignation. "I can't step away. If I show weakness, if I step down, they will tear this city apart, and they will hunt you and the boy to the ends of the earth just to be sure. My power is the only shield you have." He reached into the inner pocket of his clean jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy envelope, placing it gently on the counter beside her hand. Isla looked down at it. Passports. New identities. Untraceable accounts loaded with enough money to disappear completely, Isaiah explained, his voice cracking slightly, betraying the immense pain the words cost him. "A private plane is waiting at an airstrip 10 miles from here. It will take you anywhere in the world. You can be free of me, free of this life. You can raise him in the light, like my brother wanted." Isla stared at the thick, brown envelope. It was everything she had fought for. It was the escape she had prayed for every night in her roach-infested apartment. It was freedom. "And what about you?" Isla whispered, turning around to face him. Isaiah smiled, a small, broken expression that didn't reach his eyes. "I go back to the dark. I run the empire. I make sure no one ever comes looking for you." He paused, his dark eyes dropping to the floor. "And I pretend I don't know what it feels like to have a family again." Isla looked at the man standing before her. She saw the scars, both physical and invisible, that covered him. She thought about the cold, lonely life waiting for him, a king ruling over ashes, and she thought about the way her son looked at him not with fear, but with a profound, innocent recognition. She slowly reached out, her fingers brushing the rough paper of the envelope. Isaiah tensed, bracing himself for the inevitable loss. He closed his eyes, preparing to say goodbye to the ghost of his brother, and to the woman who had accidentally breathed life back into his dead heart. But Isla didn't pick up the envelope. Instead, she pushed it slowly across the counter, away from her. Isaiah's eyes snapped open, a look of profound, stunned confusion crossing his face. Isla took a step forward, closing the distance between them. She reached up, her small, calloused hands resting gently against his chest, right over his racing heart. "I spent a year running from ghosts." "Isaiah," Isla whispered, her voice steady and absolute. Her hazel eyes locked onto his dark ones. "I spent a year trying to survive in the cold. I won't run anymore." "Isla, you don't know what you're choosing," Isaiah breathed, his hands coming up to hover uncertainly over her waist, terrified to touch her, terrified to believe it. "It's a life of shadows. It's dangerous." "Then we will learn to fight in the dark," Isla replied, rising slightly on her toes. "He is your blood, and you are his family. And I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Isaiah let out a shuddering breath, the last walls of his formidable defenses completely collapsing. He wrapped his massive arms around her, pulling her tightly against his chest, burying his face in the dark silk of her hair. He held her as if she were the only thing tethering him to the earth, a drowning man finally finding the shore. In the corner of the room, the child with the mismatched eyes slept peacefully, completely unaware that in the heart of the criminal underworld, a new, unbreakable family had just been forged in the fire. In the end, light isn't always found in the sun. Sometimes, it is fiercely guarded in the deepest, most terrifying shadows. Isla learned that true safety wasn't about running from monsters, but finding the one monster willing to burn the world down to keep you warm. Family is forged not just by blood, but by the scars we are willing to take for one another. If Isla and Isaiah's intense journey through the darkness touched your heart, please drop a like. Share this story with someone who loves a fiercely protective romance, and subscribe for more gripping, emocional tal. What do you think Isla's life will look like as the Mafia boss's queen? Let us know in the comments below.